Yeah, that's right. So make sure that husband gets all the errands done on time, or else you're gonna leave him with a giant doughy dump.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. I had to actually scramble to find my pages of notes because I couldn't remember where I left them because I've been so
Oh,
knee deep in Gribble Nation blog stuff and shenanigans this week.
wow.
Yeah, I'm a functioning contributing member of the website.
That's right.
So how about that?
How about that?
Yeah, because I don't have enough to do as it is.
Oh, I get it. I'm about to start my new semester this coming week as an adjunct, so my life's
Oh
about
yeah,
to
that's
get a
right.
lot busier.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about the only thing I haven't tried my hand in. Being an
That's
adjunct.
right.
Maybe next year. I don't know.
Maybe.
Let's see here. All right. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
I don't. I think people recognize your voice pretty well by now, so you may not need an introduction. But you alluded to it a second ago, and this would be, I guess, my first opportunity to introduce you as a new title.
Hmm.
Because I didn't introduce you as this for the New Orleans meet, or the New
Yeah.
Orleans webinar. So why don't we refamiliarize ourselves with Laura, who is, among many other things, magician in chief. Um, she is an adjunct professor at Morgan State University. And would you like to talk a little bit about what you're doing this semester?
Yeah, so last semester was my first one. I taught the graduate level course, Introduction to Sustainable Urban Communities, and I'm teaching that again this semester, as well as three little mini one credit courses that are very similar about urbanism and basically just in much more accelerated chunks. So it's pretty exciting stuff. I just kind of jumped straight into the deep end last semester. So I feel a lot more prepared this semester, especially with the course that I've already taught. So I'm looking really, really forward to it. This stuff is my passion. As you all know on this channel by now, I love talking about urban communities. And of course, I have a love of roads and transportation, but it's fun to talk about the sustainable side of communities, which includes more, bicycle and pedestrian and multimodal transportation as well. So
Yeah, bikey wikies.
I love bikey wikies. And yes, Marcin Johansson, I see in the chat. Has anyone read The Big Roads by Earl Swift? Not only have I read The Big Roads, but I've met Earl Swift and I got to be a total fangirl when I did back in 2012. Amazing book. Real, and also talks a lot about Baltimore and Joe Giles, who was one of the community leaders, African American community leader. And all in all, it's yeah, highly recommend that book. And yes, thank you for the congratulations um, to Killer's Opinion, aka Jess. Will I be in NOLA for the meet? That is a good question. We will have to wait and see.
I'd love to have you.
I would love to be there.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're trying to drag as many Northeasterners down with us as we can. I know that there are at least a few who will be there.
Yes.
So we'll see who else jumps on the bandwagon.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. As y'all know, I've got a pretty busy life, so we'll see what happens. Um, Not ruling it out, but I can't also 100%, say with certainty I will be there either, just
She might
because I have a,
just, yeah, she might just surprise everybody and just show up. Like,
yeah,
oh,
might be like,
hello.
hello, I'm here.
All
Yeah.
right, well, we are not talking about New Orleans because we talked about that a couple weeks ago, but we are talking about the state of Arkansas, and we'll be focusing on the Little Rock area this evening in what is going to be the debut episode for the state of Arkansas in this format. So I'm
Ooh.
very excited about that. Yes, all you Razorbacks out there, I'm sure, are happy. Um,
Yeah.
I think I think I will save the Gribble Nation update stuff for the end because there's a lot that I'd like to talk about, and we need to fill the airtime during the video section with something.
That's fair.
So
And I can also talk a bit more about my courses that I'm teaching during that time too.
that'd be a good idea, yeah. So we'll
Yeah.
save that for the end. Remind me to bring that up when we start the video stuff.
Cool.
One thing I would like to mention real quick, as I bring my friends back on screen here for their weekly appearance. Now we only have 35 days until that aforementioned road meet in New Orleans. Hosted by yours truly. I hope to see a whole bunch of you there. There is information about the meet on the Road Enthusiast Meetings section of the AARoads.com forum. So, and that event has its own, page or thread contained within that section of the forum. So, that's pretty much your one-stop shop if you're looking for information. That's the most current information, whatever is posted as of right now. So, but you already knew that because all of you are going to show up and it's going to be phenomenal. So,
That's right.
there you go. All right. So there's that. Okay. Little Rock, Arkansas. So, it is the largest metropolitan area in the state of Arkansas. The population numbers you see at the top of your screen are accurate per the 2020 census. French settlers first explored and poked around in this area in the 1720s, specifically an expedition in 1722 took note of the rocky outcropping in the Arkansas River, and they called it the Little Rock. And ultimately, that is where the permanent settlement was established in 1821. Ever since the creation of the settlement that was known as Little Rock, it has always been the capital of Arkansas, whether that is as the Arkansas Territory in the 1800s or the later state of Arkansas. Also in Arkansas is the Clinton Presidential Center, which was dedicated in 2004. Bill Clinton lived in Little Rock for a number of years. He was the Attorney General of Arkansas before being the governor of the state. Before being elected president in 1992, he was the 42nd president, serving in office from 1993 to 2001. I suppose we could say, I'm almost positive he's the only president from Arkansas. So he's one of the more famous contributors from the state on the world stage. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to bring up now that aren't necessarily road related, but are Arkansas history related that I feel like we can't really discuss, can't really do a show on Little Rock without bringing these two up. And that would be the first of these two I will take the lead on, and that is the Trail of Tears, which you may have heard of this expression before. The Trail of Tears refers to the forced relocation and ethnic cleansing of Native Americans from the 5 civilized tribes of the southeastern United States: the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, the Cherokee, and the Creek. This process was initiated by the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which was signed into law by President Andrew Jackson. It's impossible to say exactly how many Native Americans were forced from the lands that are highlighted on this map here. A good ballpark estimate is about 60,000. Even harder to estimate is the number of people who perished during the marches from east to west. The vast majority of these people passed through the state of Arkansas, and the majority of those people passed through Little Rock via barge on the Arkansas River. Today, on the Arkansas River banks on both sides of the river, there are historic markers that kind of give a pretty good overview of the marches and the relocation that took place. All of these people were resettled in what was then known as Indian Territory, which is now contained in the state of Oklahoma.
I've got some notes to add on the Trail of Tears as well. So the estimated number that I have is that there were about 60,000 Native Americans that were moved, and that of that estimate, it was 40,000 that passed through, and they passed through both by land and by water. By land, they were trudged into town along today's Broadway and Main Street in North Little Rock. And then, as you've already mentioned, that more arrived by boat aboard steamships and barges up the Mississippi, or in the case of the Seminoles from Florida, on ships that left Tampa and sailed halfway across the Gulf of Mexico. And the name, the Trail of Tears, comes from the Choctaw chief referring to the mass removal as a trail of tears and death. As he witnessed his fellow exiles huddled on the shores of the Arkansas River. In Little Rock itself, actually, the Cherokee Nation chief's wife, Uadi, I may not be pronouncing that correctly, but she actually died on the day that the Victoria ship landed at Little Rock in 1839, and she's buried in Mount Holly Cemetery, not far from the Arkansas River shore. But basically, the National Park Service published by a quote by them that it can be safely said that the Little Rock area was the site of more concentrated activities related to the removal of the 5 large southeastern tribes than any other place. And it's a lesson of how we can always do better and always learn from our mistakes. And based off of what I've been reading, there's been a lot of talk in the past couple of years about, adding more, whatever that looks like, but basically adding more to, commemorate the Trail of Tears in Little Rock and North Little Rock.
Yeah, it's really an ugly chapter in this country's history that I suppose it gets brought up every once in a while, but it's one of those things that I think just doesn't really get the attention that it really should get. So it was nice to see the attention that it did receive in the city of Little Rock in the form of the historic markers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can and should be better than this. And, the only way that you prevent stuff like this from happening again in the future is to learn from it.
Yeah.
But
so basically what they're looking at is, and this was, based off what I read as of like 2022, looking at what they want to do as far as what kind of monuments and updated signage, and plaques and things that they want to have along the river. And I think it's important to note too that the site of, this being right along the river, it's road related, sadly, in the sense that this was a forced road of, indigenous people. And that as you're driving along, the interstates today, you're passing through and, over and next to in these areas. So.
Yeah, I suppose the next closest thing that we have to this would be the internment of the Japanese in World War II, but that was not quite the same thing because that wasn't a permanent measure. But still, that kind of has echoes of this, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. So, okay, something else. I'm going to turn the floor over to you for this one, Laura. We're going to
Sure.
mention the Little Rock Nine. Um, one of the real flashpoints of the civil rights movement in the 1950s, and this took place in September of 1957, in the aftermath of the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. This is where 9 African American students enrolled in Little Rock Central High School, and well, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so the Little Rock Nine were, the 9 African American students that desegregated Little Rock Central High School, um, and they've, in compliance with Brown versus Board of Education, basically on the first day of school, September 4th, 1957, they were physically blocked from entering the school by a white mob of segregationist protesters. So, so at that point, the governor had to deploy the Arkansas National Guard. Or wait, no, sorry, I had that backwards. So they attempted to integrate the high school, but the governor then deployed the Arkansas National Guard to support the segregationists, but then
Yeah,
only
right.
but then only backed down after Judge Davies of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Arkansas granted an injunction from the U.S. Department of Justice to withdraw the guard. But then angry mobs began rioting, so then President Eisenhower had to deploy the 101st Airborne Division and federalize the Arkansas National Guard to protect the students in
That's
order
the
for
key.
them.
Yeah, that's one of the stranger parts of this, that the National Guard in Arkansas was originally protecting the rights of the segregationists, but then President Eisenhower signed an order that basically flipped their
Yeah.
allegiance.
Yep.
Yeah, it was very weird how that all went down politically.
Yes. And then, as a result of all of that, the next year, Little Rock closed its 4 public high schools. And
Yeah, so
so,
I don't think that people know that part of the story.
no,
So tell us more about that.
so the thing is, and this was sadly a common tactic, not just in Little Rock, but around the South, that in order to stop integration from happening, the school systems just closed the schools. In Little Rock, what they ended up doing was they actually offered the high school classes on TV. So you think about how during the pandemic we had, virtual learning. In 1958 to 59 in Little Rock, they had TV learning. And, yeah. So the other thing that happened in a lot of communities in the South is that, basically how they resegregated the schools is they closed the public schools and then opened, what we now think of today as segregation academies. So they opened private schools that then only enrolled white students.
Right. And to follow up on the whole TV learning part of this, the people who would be most capable of following that mode of education would be people who are most likely to afford televisions, aka the white people.
Correct.
Right.
Right, because we take having TVs for granted today, but back then
Absolutely.
not everybody had a TV.
I think in 1958 it was still seen as a luxury, right?
I think so,
I
yeah.
think that's fair to say.
Yeah, and it was black and white at that point. So
Right, yeah.
yeah, and it took until 1972 for integration to occur across all grades in Little Rock.
Wow. I didn't know that part of it, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's so messed up how that was, the reaction. And I can't speak for Little Rock specifically, but again, another trend of things that happened is once, and this happened definitely in other, cities and counties, but that was also a motivator for further sprawl and white flight. was once, schools were integrated, again, there was, they opened the segregation academies and closed the public schools, but then also people just moved out and moved away. So then the schools,
Yeah, yeah.
so then when the schools reopened, what happened is that you had de facto segregation again. Because so they reopened the schools in 1959. A lot of the white families then just moved to the suburbs.
Yeah, they moved
And
to North Little Rock.
yes,
Yeah.
and which then, and now again, I don't have the statistics for how this happened exactly in Little Rock, but I know based in Baltimore, it was you had like in Baltimore, most schools had maybe 1 year of actual integration. That you had like the first year where it happened, and then by the next year, people moved, and that's also why later you had to have forced busing to try and get around the fact that people were moving to in order to resegregate schools. So
Right, yeah. Right.
that's the history of that.
Well, anyway,
Yeah,
the
we could do a whole episode, right, just
I
on
think
this stuff.
we probably could, yeah. So the Little Rock Central High School is still there in town. Its National Historic Site is maintained by the National Park Service. So you can check that out if you're in the vicinity. A statue commemorating the Little Rock Nine is located on the grounds of the Arkansas State Capitol. I gotta be honest with you, looking at the picture. Have you seen the pictures of the Little Rock Nine statue?
I have.
Yeah, tell me what you think of what I'm about to say. I think that this is a terrible representation of them.
Yeah,
It
I
doesn't
mean,
even. I mean, they look like zombies. They don't look like people.
yeah, I don't know.
I don't.
Like,
I'm not an artist. I'm not a sculptor, so I don't know what goes into this kind of stuff. I don't know what kind of public input went into this thing. But if you're asking me, and this has nothing to do, obviously, with my opinion of the nine individuals who are depicted, I think this statue is ridiculous. I think it looks terrible. But nevertheless, it is located on the grounds of the Arkansas State Capitol. Um, it is there for you to visit.
it is. I mean, I don't know much about it. I mean, my first impression, yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
Yeah, it's important to clarify that the Little Rock Central High is not a national park. It's operated by the National Park Service. I think it's considered a National Historic Site. But it is operated under the umbrella of the National Park Service.
Yeah.
Um,
I do think
anyway,
it's worth noting, that looking at this at the sculpture again, I think the it really shows the mixed emotions that, the apprehension, the fear, the anxiousness, but yet the excitement of of being able to go to Little Rock Central High School. So I do think that the sculpture really captures that. I think it captures when you have so many emotions on your face that you don't even know how to, like, you know what I mean? Like, I see that, and that I find impressive.
mm,
And the way that, obviously that they are in a group but also spread out a bit, so in order to, like, take up more space, um to, like, signify their presence. So I don't know. Like, I'm not the best judge of art, but I think I can see what they were going for, and I do like it.
all right, I'll go along with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the Arkansas Capitol grounds, and these are pictures of downtown. These were taken. Well, the one in the upper left was taken from the North Little Rock side of the river, and then the other one was taken from near the Clinton Presidential Center. Speaking of which, there it is in this picture in the lower left, which, as I said, was dedicated in 2004 and is basically your one-stop shop for anything that you ever possibly want to know about President Bill Clinton. It's all located here. By the way, if you're wondering why the building is designed the way that it is, that's because it's cantilevered out over the Arkansas River floodplain. So they couldn't build a building that goes straight down to ground in this area, so they built something that is where you come into the atrium at ground level. It's actually up on the high ground, up on the top of the hill, and then the rest of the library is built on basically a bridge-like structure that continues out towards the river. So that's what you're seeing there. Picture in the upper right, that's the old State House in downtown. That was the original Capitol building from back in the 1800s. And there's a museum for the state's history contained in there and all sorts of other good stuff. All right, so we've covered all of that ground. Let's talk about some roads here.
Roads!
So here we have a couple of similar looking maps from a few years apart. The map on the left is going to be about 1960 or so, and then the map on the right is about, I would say, about 10 years after that. So what we're seeing here is the completion of the first freeways in Little Rock, I-30 and I-40. They're largely in place pretty early on in the evolution of the construction. The next freeway to really enter the picture in full was the West Bypass, which is I-430. You can see that. You can see the difference between its depiction on the two maps here. And other freeways ultimately join in the party here. We have I-630, which runs east to west across town. And then the I-440 East Bypass, which was added to the interstate system relatively late on in the process. That becomes a dotted line around 1970 and sees construction shortly thereafter. As we continue into the late 20th, early 21st century, we have really the interstate system in Little Rock complete as it stands today. The one thing that remained a dotted line into the 2000s was the northern continuation of the East Belt, which is now signed as Arkansas Highway 440. And here is the system as it stands currently in 2024. You have your two mainline freeways, 30 and 40 intersecting here, and then you have, it's hard for me to keep these straight sometimes, so I always get 430 and 440 confused. And then there's also 530 and 630 thrown in there for good measure. 530 was an addition around the year 2000, which we will cover in due course. So that is a look at the metro as a whole in map form. All right, let's, as we usually do on these programs, let's go around the metro highway by highway. We're going to start with I-40. Built across the state of Arkansas in the 1960s. In general, it was imagined as a functional replacement for US 64 west of Little Rock and US 70 east of Little Rock. The I-30, I-40 confluence is significant to talk about. Chances are, if you are receiving goods by truck, they might be passing through Little Rock on 30 and making their way onto 40. It's a major exchange point for long-distance truck traffic between Texas and the Northeast, because, of course, I-30 begins out in the Dallas area and then runs up to Little Rock, and then from there you can pick up 40, which will take you to the East Coast, and then you can pick up 81, which will take you up to the Northeast. So it's part of the, I think it is one of the shorter distance ways that you can take on the interstate system to get you from Texas to, say, Virginia. All right. So that is the deal with I-40. I should also mention that west of Little Rock, it becomes so Little Rock is kind of like the dividing line between like the Ozarks and the more hilly terrain in the western part of the state, and the Mississippi River, floodplain and the low-lying areas, east of there. West of Little Rock, I-40 gets a lot more interesting to drive than east of it, because you actually have like hills and mountains to look at. And then when we talk about Fort Smith in a little while, we also see tunnels involved in the interstate system out that way. I-30 was the first freeway to be constructed in Little Rock. Construction on it began right around the time of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. The first sections of it to be completed were the bridge on the Arkansas River and its immediate approaches in downtown and in North Little Rock. That was completed in 1958. So the thing that's currently in the news right now is, if you are keeping up with these things, is what they're calling the 30 Crossing Project. And that is a $650 million investment that is going towards replacing the Arkansas River Bridge and also improving interchanges, and it's adding more travel lanes, and it's straightening out the situation with the entry and exit ramps into and out of downtown. And it's also going to be providing better connections between the bridge on the Arkansas River and Interstate 630. So this project began in 2020 and is currently on track for completion in the year 2024. I think the next phase of the Arkansas River Bridge is going to open this spring. We're recording this in January of 24. I think it's going to open in the not too distant future. So actually, a lot of the pictures you're seeing here, these were taken in 2021. So these will not necessarily represent the current conditions on the ground, but these two pictures kind of do a little bit of a better job of that. These were taken in February of 2023. In the upper left, you see the progress on the new Arkansas River Bridge, and you see the drive on eastbound I-30 on the new construction. This had been, as I said, these were taken in February of 23. So what remained to be completed at this point was the second half of the new structure and all the new interchanges on both sides of the river, and that, as I said, will be completed later this year.
So, Dan.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about the 30 Crossing Project?
Okay, so you have different schools of thought here.
Yes.
You have the faction of people who are saying that it's not really, or it is worth the investment because the infrastructure is aging and there needs to be additional travel lanes and facilities for vehicle traffic to get downtown, particularly from the north suburbs. There is another group that opposes this project on the grounds that it is a bit excessive, that traffic counts do not warrant the amount of freeway expansion that we are seeing as part of this project. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle on this. I think that the 1958 bridge was functionally obsolete and needed to be updated, and also the original ramps that took you downtown off the bridge needed to be replaced. So getting rid of those and getting rid of those ramps in the middle of the downtown street grid opens up that whole area downtown for redevelopment, which I think is a good thing. My opinion is that the bridge did need to be replaced, but it did not need to be as expansive a project as it is. So, these things are never usually black and white. There's always in most cases there are benefits to these things and there are drawbacks to these things.
Yeah, I mean,
Removal of
I,
I guess my point is that removal of the freeway was never going to be an option here. And if you're going to keep the corridor in place, then yes, you're going to need to make a significant investment to keep it current. I just object to a lot of the expansion that was going on here.
those are my thoughts too. I don't, I seriously question whether it needed to be expanded from 6 lanes to 10 lanes. Um, that is the part that I agree with you that a lot that the bridge, replacing the bridge, fine, taking out and the downtown ramps for more development, to encourage redevelopment. I mean, is that's a good thing. I seriously question why they needed to widen it as much as they did.
Yeah, so the other thing to mention here is that Little Rock is not generally a metro area that's prone to traffic congestion.
Yeah.
Um, the one place where you will find it is at the Arkansas River and at the ramps to 630. Like that is, if you had to bet one location to find a traffic jam in the city on any given day before this project started, that would be the place you'd pick. Um, so the thing is, like, there's not that much traffic in the city anyway. And remember, this is a metro area of 750,000. Um, all you're really doing here is favoring the people in the north of the metro and just encouraging more induced demand for more
Yep.
sprawl to happen out that way. That's kind of how my reading of this is. And
That is exactly my reading.
yeah, and it's just so, again, replacing the Arkansas River Bridge to me was a necessity, but I do
Yeah.
think that there is such a thing as overkill. And the unintended consequence of this, I believe, is going to be more sprawl out in the north and out in the northeast as a result of this.
Yeah. I agree with you that the Arkansas Bridge needed to be replaced. I think too that there's the that removing the elevated ramps between President Clinton Avenue and Third Street, and replacing the elevated Highway 10 spur with an improved at-grade Second Street. I think all that's going to enhance east-west connectivity and include more, connectivity with bicycle and pedestrian stuff. Just baffled. I think the thing that baffles me even more, and I don't know if you know much about this, Stan, but the fact that that in the 30 crossing project, right? They're widening to 10 lanes, and so then as a result, the Little Rock was ended up applying for, and they won from the U.S. Department of Transportation a $2 million planning grant to begin design work for a proposed deck park in between 6th and 9th Streets over I-30. And as part of the Reconnected Communities pilot program, which is very baffling to me. I mean, I think that the deck park is needed, but like, wait, so they're allowed to add more lanes? And like, that's not the point of that program. The point of that program isn't the point of that program is to, right some of the wrongs that happened back in like the 1960s, not to, create more lanes and then right those wrongs in 2024. That baffles me. That
Yeah.
I'm very blown away by that.
I'm very confused by a lot of the decisions that are made nowadays with this stuff. Because at best it's sending mixed signals.
It is.
And I'm alluding to this. I alluded to this with the New Orleans episode, and I'll allude to this again before we talk about it in March. But the proposal to reimagine the interstate system around downtown Houston is a chock full of nonsense. Yeah, we're tearing down a freeway in one neighborhood, but in the next neighborhood over, we're doubling the size of the freeway. So it's like, oh, see, we're all about neighborhood connectivity. Now excuse us while we go and disenfranchise another group of minorities instead. It's just ridiculous.
It's
So
pretty
I,
baffling.
I can't figure it out, man. It's just you get to a point where you just throw your hands up and it's like, you know what? It's like that meme that I share every once in a while. That Kermit the Frog doing coke meme that says whatever. I mean, that's where I'm at now. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, what are we doing here? You know?
Oh, ooh. I want to throw one more thing that I think is a very interesting tidbit in the shadows of I-30.
Don't do coke, everybody.
Huh?
Don't do coke, everybody.
No,
That's not a
please
good idea.
don't. No, just say no to drugs.
Just say no.
And
I'm
that's all
saying
you
yes
have
to
to
this
say.
glass of wine, by the way.
Well, while you drink your wine, I will drink out of my new Stanley, I got a Stanley cup, everyone. It is a knockoff Stanley cup, but it is it is a Swifty Stanley cup. So I am hydrating.
She's not a Vegas Golden Knights fan. She's just a Taylor Swift fan. That's all.
I'm a Taylor Swift fan, and I'm not drinking out of the hockey Stanley Cup. I am drinking out of my Taylor Swift knockoff Stanley Cup. That comment alone might be the best way to date this episode in the future. Like, yes, this was January 2024. A Swifty Stanley Cup. Anyway, before we move on from I-30, I want to point out one other interesting civil rights thing. In the shadows of I-30, at 518 East 27th Street is the Lassus Inn, which is a restaurant that was founded in 1905 and was a meeting place for local civil rights leaders in the 50s and 60s. It did have to move in the 60s slightly due to the freeway construction, but it's literally smack next to I-30. And it was where the planning efforts were held for many civil rights things, including the desegregation of Little Rock Central High School. And it was inducted into the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You get a gold star this evening.
Well, thank you.
Speaking of, here's another highway that gets a gold star in the future Interstates bracket. The US 67 and 167 freeway, which runs... So if you're looking at the map of Little Rock, you have the junction with 30 and 40 in North Little Rock, and then the US 67 freeway begins a short distance east of there and kind of runs in a northeasterly direction. There's a shock. Up towards Missouri and the I-55 corridor. This corridor, the corridor that originally became US 67 in 1927, was originally known as the Lakes to Gulf Highway, which followed a predecessor old wagon road called the Old Southwest Trail, which connected St. Louis with northern Texas. So that's kind of how US 67 came to be. Now, in the years following the Little Rock 9 thing and people moving to the north and northeast of the metro area, what was basically a 2-lane U.S. highway became a major freeway over the course of a 30-year period. Spoiler alert, that's because everybody was moving out that way. That was the hot suburban area of the metro for people to move out to. Now, this freeway is, as I mentioned, part of the future I-57 corridor. Now, I-57, as it currently exists, runs from the south side of Chicago southward to I-55. I am blanking on the name of the town where those two freeways come together in Missouri, but it's a little bit southwest of Cairo, Illinois. It's in Missouri, but it's not. The nearest town of significance is Cairo.
Isn't it Quincy? Am I remembering that correctly?
It might be. Somebody who is smarter than me in the chat will let us know. But yeah, so the future extension of I-57, in a nutshell here, is intended to run southwesterly from that point to the I-40, I-30 interchange in Little Rock. Future I-57 was officially designated along this stretch in 2017 as part of High Priority Corridor 89. Long-term funding and construction of improvements that would bring the remainder of the corridor to interstate standard is kind of a pipe dream at the moment. There's no significant plan in place for construction of the remaining 50 or 60 miles of freeway that would be necessary. That's not including the miles of freeway that would need to be upgraded. So get used to seeing future I-57 signs on this stretch, but even that is a significant development considering where we were 10 years ago. So,
oh, and it's not Quincy. I was way off. Quincy's in a completely different part of the state.
Well, I don't even know Missouri all that well, so Missouri is one of my 5 least favorite states. So I just don't. I see the "Welcome to Missouri" sign, and I just instinctively want to turn around.
Oh, I like Missouri.
You like a lot of states that I just can't stand.
It's true. I love Nebraska.
Oh my God.
Nebraska's wonderful.
Yeah. For you,
you just haven't.
Yeah.
You just haven't seen enough of it.
Oh, I've seen plenty of it. Let me tell you.
No, you haven't. I've seen a lot. As somebody who doesn't travel nearly as much as you do, I've actually seen a lot more of Nebraska than you have.
That's probably true. Because I think you did the drive basically all the way across the state, right?
I did drive all the way across the state.
I mean, I kind of went all the way across the state, just in the short direction. Because I wanted to cheat because I couldn't stand Nebraska. But anyway. Actually, you know what? That's not even true. Like, I guess I-29 doesn't even go into Nebraska, technically. So I waved to Nebraska as I went by. I guess that's the Missouri River that it parallels. So on the other side of the Missouri River is Nebraska, but I was on the I-29 side, which is the good side. So I waved to Nebraska on my way by.
Yeah. Well, you just need to do a trip that is actually on some of the state and U.S. highways through the state. And I think that you will have a different appreciation for Nebraska.
You know what? I have heard that. To be fair, I have heard that from people that a lot of those states, like from Iowa on west, are a lot more interesting when you're off the interstate system.
Yes.
And I do think that I can see that being the case. Yeah. So we shall see. Maybe I'll start clinching U.S. highways once I'm done with the interstate system, because I'm going to start running out of stuff to do on that in the next few years.
You should. I think that'll be a very worthwhile goal.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, I would love to tell you about I-430. So the 1955 Little Rock freeway plan included the Western Bypass, which became part of Interstate 430. One of the centerpieces of this freeway is the bridge on the Arkansas River, which is the only bridge on the river between Little Rock and Conway, which is a pretty significant stretch of waterway. So it's a pretty important crossing, not just for the interstate system, but for local traffic on the west side of the metro. This bridge was rehabbed in a project that took place in 2021 and 22. One of its features, well, there were a couple of things that were going on here. The entire deck of the bridge was rehabbed and replaced. And then the other thing was that as part of the deck replacement, a new flex lane was added in each direction. So what that basically did was it transformed the right shoulders into an optional travel lane during peak hours. So it's kind of like shoulder running, except it's an actual lane on the bridge that can be opened, depending on what is going on, time of day and traffic flows and that kind of thing. The picture in the upper left on this slide shows the flex lane on the bridge. You can see how it is striped on the right, and you have variable message signs and that will show either red X's or green arrows, depending on if the lane is closed or open. The other significant development recently, or I guess within the last 10 years, was the reconstruction of the 430 630 crossroads in the west of Little Rock. This interchange was sometimes known as the Big Rock Interchange. Um, it is one of the largest interchanges in the state of Arkansas. It was reconstructed, I think it was originally a cloverleaf, if I'm not mistaken. It was rebuilt in a project that was completed in 2015 at a cost of $150 million. High-speed flyovers were added to connect traffic directly between the two interstates here, and traffic flows a heck of a lot better here now than it used to. The other significant piece of this is that this interchange is located right across from the Baptist Medical Center, which is the single largest medical facility in the state of Arkansas. Which helps explain why there's a decent amount of traffic there, and also, we'll talk about I-630 in a second. I won't spoil too much for you. Before we get to 630, let's talk about 440. I told you that I confuse 430 and 440 all the time, and I almost did it just now. The East Belt proposal was not part of the original 1950s freeway vision for Little Rock. It was added significantly later, probably due to the mass suburbanization of the metro in the 1960s. And what this freeway functions as is, yes, it's an eastern bypass for the city. It also is a direct freeway connection between downtown Little Rock's airport and the deep water port on the Arkansas River. Barge traffic can access from the Mississippi River on up the Arkansas Basin, as far upriver as Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so there is a non-negligible amount of barge traffic on the river in this area of the state. The Deepwater Port in Little Rock is actually one of the deepest inland ports, or not, it's one of the busiest deepwater ports in the inland reaches of the U.S. As of the recording of this episode. So the I-440 designation applies to all of that stuff between Interstates 30 and 40. Now, the construction that has taken place since then is designated as State Highway 440. And that is due to two reasons. One is that it doesn't connect to another interstate highway at its end, so it's a state highway for now. It could be re-signed as part of the interstate system if one of two things happen. If the US 67 freeway receives I-57 shields in the near future, the other possibility would be if the extension of 440 around the north of the metro is ever built to loop it back to I-40 northwest of Little Rock. Now, that has been an idea that's kind of been off and on over the last 30 to 40 years or so. This project has the working title of the North Belt Freeway. The picture on the lower right of this slide shows where Arkansas 440 comes to an end at US 67. And there are stubs here that hint at a potential extension of the freeway westward, back towards the west, back towards I-40. This extension, which would have to be built at a cost of at least $600 million, has been put on hold indefinitely due to high costs and because of the fact that, A, there probably isn't enough traffic demand here to warrant such a project, and B, the engineering of some of this stuff is just... it's not something that they're willing to pursue at this point. I think there's an Army reservation in this area that they would have to navigate, and it's just not something that the state of Arkansas is willing to pursue at this point. So it's not likely that we would see any additional construction on 440 anytime soon. All right, so we arrive at I-630. Let me see here. So we have a few things we could discuss here with 630.
One fun trivia fact that has nothing to do with I-630 in Arkansas is that my birthday is June 30th.
Well, you know what? That's true.
It is. So, sorry, I just had to throw that out
You
there.
know what? I'll allow it. That's all right.
All
Um,
right.
so this highway was proposed in 1958. It was a subsequent addition to the um, the initial master plan that was developed for the city in 1955. Um,
So,
they were, however, not able to secure federal funding for it to be included as part of the interstate system. So this was a project that initially, in the first 10 to 15 years of its existence, was undertaken by the city of Little Rock.
right.
Um,
And actually, it goes back further than that, but I can touch on that a little later.
okay. Yeah, before you do that, I want to talk about why this is even in the interstate system in the first
Yes,
place. Because
please
that
do.
wasn't, as I said, that was not part of the plan when this highway was developed, and when they were not able to secure funding by way of either the Federal Highway Act of 1956 or its subsequent follow-up in 1968. Well, sometimes it helps to have friends in high places. And Arkansas had just such a guy by the name of Congressman Wilbur D. Mills, who at the time represented the state of Arkansas in Congress. He was also the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, so he basically controlled the money in Congress, right?
Yep.
So he knew that the scope of the interstate highway system was firmly fixed at 42,500 miles. But he did a little bit of accounting on his end. Instead of just leaving the numbers as it was, he actually took all the mileage from all the states and he rounded it down.
Yep.
And he basically was able to come up with 7 additional miles that technically didn't exist, but because of his rounding and his mathematical practices, they were apparently available to him. So he said, "Oh, I shall take these extra 7 miles and I shall apply it to this freeway project in Little Rock, and we shall call it Interstate 630." And that's what happened. Of course, it's
Yeah.
advantageous that they would do that because including it in the interstate system ensured 90/10 funding, federal to state. And the
Right.
city of Little Rock was not interested in paying for this project in full, which is what they would have had to do otherwise. So it was added to the interstate system in 1970. The construction of the freeway kind of got going, kind of didn't in the 1960s. Again, this was kind of a funding issue, but once funding was available, construction did proceed in the 1970s. The full freeway was in place by 1985.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
what would you like to say?
Sure. So it's interesting because like you said, the project was first, it was a Little Rock project at first, right? It wasn't part of the original, but it predates 1958 and it predates the Federal Highway Act. It was actually first conceived in the 1930s and first planned by the Pulaski County Planning Board in their 1941 report. And because Little Rock city planners basically, were advocating for there to be an east-west expressway. Um, Urban renewal came about with the Federal Housing Act of 1949, which aimed to modernize, quote unquote, blighted areas within cities. And so after the Federal Housing Act and Federal Highway Act were passed, the Little Rock Housing Authority began to evaluate West 9th Street's urban condition. And so in 1958, they declared it a blighted area.
You
And
said that this was in 1958.
yes.
I don't know, call me crazy, but I wonder if that's not a coincidence given what happened in 57.
It is not a coincidence. Not at all. This was definitely intentional because this was an African American neighborhood.
That's right.
Yep. And so basically they threatened the owners to sell at the price that they appraised, which of course was lower than the actual value, or else they'll, take it and evict everyone. So the other thing that's worth noting here is that urban renewal was not just a way to, clear areas, through quote unquote slum clearance. It was also a way to keep neighborhoods segregated because, the interesting thing, and if you want to read the most depressing book ever, I highly suggest the book The Color of Law. Basically talks about how, in the 20th century, people were, both white Americans and black Americans were slowly integrating themselves. The U.S. government did not like this and intentionally started creating public housing projects in the 1940s to resegregate people. And so basically the idea was that, they considered this area blighted, not just to, clear it, for this proposed highway, and also, coincidentally around the time of school integration, but it was also a way to move people to a different part of the city, to move them out of what was at the time the Mecca, what was at the time called the Mecca of, black entertainment in the South, to another neighborhood. And also, as they were doing this, they decided between 1958 and 1961 to turn West 8th and West 9th Streets into one-way streets. So moving property owners out and then completely changing the configuration of the streets on the ground to basically, destroy the neighborhood. Basically forcing residents and businesses and churches out. And then, so clearing the way for the construction of I-630 in the 1960s. So,
yeah, we see this as a recurring pattern, especially in southern cities. Where you take the most vibrant African American community and you say, "Oh, I think we should put a freeway here." Whether that is here in West 9th in Little Rock, whether it's the east side of Atlanta, whether it is the Treme in New Orleans. We see this pattern predictably playing out in all of these cities at roughly the same time, right? I mean, this is 1950s, early 60s when this stuff is happening.
Right.
And I should add that in conclusion here, when the freeway was in place, guess what happened? You had massive suburban sprawl out in West Little Rock.
That's right.
So you basically gut your city center, you gut your connected neighborhoods, and you just encourage more sprawl in other parts of the metro that were not intended to receive it, and their infrastructure was not built to support it either. So it took until the 2010s for that interchange with 430 and 630 to be built properly to handle the amount of traffic that it carried. So these kinds of decisions that are made have ripple effects all across a metropolitan area. It's not just the neighborhood where it's directly impacted. These things happen on a metro-wide scale, and sometimes, in certain cases, they can have entire regional impacts as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So that is the story of 630. We have a couple more highways for your consideration. Talking of late entries into the interstate system, 530 is another one of these. Now, it was conceived before it was an interstate. It was part of the relocated US 65 corridor between Pine Bluff and Little Rock. It was built on a new freeway alignment. Federal funding for improvements to make it worthy of interstate designation were made in the late 1990s. In particular, the construction of the Pine Bluff Bypass was completed in 1999. At that point, the Interstate 530 designation was approved for the entire stretch of freeway between Little Rock and Pine Bluff. Now, State Highway 530 is intended to be a southern continuation of this interstate from Pine Bluff on southwards towards the city of Monticello in southern Arkansas. The idea here would be to connect Little Rock with the Interstate 69 corridor, which would run more on an east-west alignment through southeastern Arkansas. But that project, all of that project is kind of in a permanent status of, WTF at this point. So I don't think anybody's expecting any construction on I-69 in Arkansas anytime soon. Parts of Arkansas 530 have been built as a Super 2, and you can see on this slide how things are currently set up. You do have overpasses that are built with room for a second parallel roadway to be added underneath them in the future. However, I would not consider any construction of those to be a near future item. And this, of course, transitions us seamlessly into I-69, which in Arkansas, the only future section of it that exists as of right now is the Monticello Bypass, which is currently signed as US 278 Bypass. It was the first I-69 related project in Arkansas, and it was completed in what exists of it now was completed in 2018. There is an eastern extension of this highway that began construction in 2022, which is ultimately intended to connect to US 65 and McGee. That project might see completion by the end of this decade, and upon completion of that segment, the word on the street is that the US 278 bypass designation may be replaced with the Arkansas Highway 569 designation, because it is considered a part of the future I-69 corridor. Now, as for the rest of the corridor, I'm actually, as we go to this slide here, I'm actually really impressed that they took the trouble to build such a sign that tells you, hey, guess what, everybody? This is the future I-69 corridor. How about that? Not that you'll ever see it in your lifetime, but here it is. I-69 will run roughly east to west across the southern part of the state, as I mentioned. It'll run southwesterly into northwestern Louisiana, not far from Shreveport. It will, in Arkansas and Mississippi, involve the construction of a new bridge over the Mississippi River somewhere in the vicinity of Arkansas City. And then I-69 will curve northward to roughly parallel US 61 up to Tunica in the Memphis area. The bridge project has been conditionally approved, pending funding. However, guess what? There's no funding available for it, so I don't know when we would ever see construction of this. It's also hard to imagine this bridge getting much traffic at all, not without the massive construction of the interstate that would connect to it. Building the bridge is nice, but this is one of those things that I kind of go on a little bit of a rant about in my Gribble Nation blog series on the Lower Mississippi River, which we'll talk about more during the video section of the program tonight. That it's nice to be able to build bridges. I'm a civil engineer, and I love me some bridges, man. I can't get enough of a nice cable stay bridge like this one that's pictured rendering here, right? But at some point, you do have to ask yourself, who is this benefiting, and what exactly is the point? So to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this particular bridge without the robust connections that it would need to be functional and successful, I don't know that would really be a worthwhile spending of federal funds, especially at a time like this in our country's history. So those are my very brief 2 cents on that. Like I said, it's a beautiful looking bridge, and yeah, in a vacuum, I would love to see it be built. But I do think that when it comes to the I-69 corridor in general, I do think that we have many other projects that ought to be much higher priority than this.
Yep.
So, anyway, from one future interstate highway corridor to another. So if I-69 wasn't enough for you, let's talk about I-49.
All right.
As we go out to the western part of the state. So this is the other auxiliary interstate in the state of Arkansas. We mentioned 555 in our Memphis episode that we did last week. So that one's already been covered here. So that leaves only one, and that's 540. So 540 is another one that's had a bit of a weird history. It was conceived in the 1960s as a bypass for Fort Smith and a connector from I-40 to US 71 south of Fort Smith. Construction here took place in the late 60s and was completed in the early 70s. This was for the freeway from I-40 on southward. Then, a separate proposal called for an extension of the interstate system up into northwestern Arkansas, particularly the city of Fayetteville, which is, it's actually a little bit, when you think about it, it's a little bit surprising that it took this long for the interstate system to reach northwestern Arkansas, because Fayetteville and that whole corner of the state is very influential politically. The University of Arkansas is located in that area. So it wasn't until the 1990s that a freeway corridor was constructed for that part of the state, and it was connected with Interstate 40 around that time. The section of freeway north of I-40 was originally a northern extension of I-540. It was redesignated from I-40 northward into part of the I-49 corridor in 2014. This section also features, I believe it's the only freeway tunnel in the state of Arkansas, the Bobby Hopper Tunnel, which was opened as part of that freeway project in 1999. This tunnel, located on I-49, a short distance north of I-40, is 1,600 feet long. It is named for the director of the Arkansas Highway Commission at the time of its construction. Now, the other part of this that needs to be mentioned is State Highway 549, which, you guessed it, is part of the future I-49 corridor, which is complete from Kansas City to the Fort Smith area, from north to south, and then there's a gap, and then it picks up again on the north side of Texarkana and runs to Shreveport. I mean, there is technically a gap there, but let's just say that it is a continuous interstate highway between Texarkana and Lafayette, Louisiana at I-10. We'll explain that whole Shreveport issue with maybe a Shreveport episode at some point in the future. But so the gap that exists between I-40, or south of I-40 really, and I-30 between Fort Smith and Texarkana is a very long-term wish list item for the interstate system that would close the gap nationally in I-49. And this little piece of freeway that is signed as Arkansas 549 is part of that long-term future corridor. Now, a section of freeway that would connect existing Arkansas 549 with I-40 began construction in 2023. It may reach completion by the end of the decade. The cost of this project is pretty exorbitant. It's about $400 million in all, I believe. Most of that money is going towards the new high-rise bridge on the Arkansas River. It's not clear if this would be signed as I-49 upon that project's completion. Conflicting sources suggest one would suggest that it will be part of the interstate system. Another suggests that it'll just be part of 549 until the freeway is extended south of US 71. In any case, we are still several years off from any new freeway mileage in western Arkansas to be able to drive, and then time will tell, what exactly happens. But either way, the thing for you to know is that Arkansas 549, yes, is indeed part of the future I-49 corridor and is not related to the I-540 corridor in any way. Okay. We want to talk about bridges?
Yay, bridges!
Well, let's deal with some bridges here before we close up the PowerPoint here. We're going to go through some bridges of the Arkansas River. I'm going to go through briefly the ones that you see listed on the screen here. And we will start with the bridge that has probably the single best nickname of any bridge anywhere in the United States. I am, of course, referencing the Big Dam Bridge. Completed in 2006. It was originally known, its working title was the Murray Lock and Dam Bridge because it spans the Murray Lock and Dam on the Arkansas River west of Little Rock. It was completed as a pedestrian facility in 2006. It's about 4,200 feet long in total. This bridge is the longest pedestrian and bicycle bridge in North America that has never been used by trains or motor vehicles. Usually when we think about pedestrian and bicycle facilities, we think of bridges that are being recycled or bridges that once carried one of those two modes of traffic but fell out of use and have been restored for some sort of use in the local community. And that is the case in almost all of the prominent examples that you hear about. But this is the example of the single longest bridge that was from the start. They knew it was going to be a pedestrian facility and they built it as such.
Very cool.
I would say the signature bridge in Little Rock is this one, the Broadway Bridge. It's got a very neat double arch span to it, which opened in 2017. Each of those arch spans you see are 450 feet long. The predecessor bridge at this location was built in 1923 and lasted until 2015. There's quite a debate that can erupt on message boards and all sorts of stuff as to which design is preferred. You know, the new age design that you see here or the old style reinforced concrete arches of the predecessor. I think a fair argument can be made in either direction here, but I do think that they did a pretty nice job with this iteration of it, at least. The Main Street Bridge, on the other hand, is rather nondescript. This version of the bridge opened in 1973. There were at least two other bridges at this site going back the previous 100 years. The first bridge at Main Street was built in 1897. That was replaced with a longer-lasting steel truss bridge that was built in 1924. That one lasted into the 1970s. As I mentioned, the existing bridge here opened in 1973. The downtown landing of this bridge on Main Street had to be relocated in the 1990s to serve the expansion of the state's convention center downtown. So that is why the highway takes a jog to the left if you're coming into downtown. It's because it used to go straight back down to the city grid, but then the convention center expanded to I guess that would be to the east. So they had to move the bridge, basically, in order to make room for this convention center expansion. And that work was completed in the late 1990s and was complete by 1998. As we look at this slide here, you will never guess what the name of this bridge is. And I'll give you, how many guesses should I give the audience here? If they can help me out and tell me what the name of this bridge is.
I give them 3 guesses, but the first 2 don't count.
That might be that's a fair deal, I think. Yes, you are looking at the Junction Bridge, which was built as a railroad bridge in 1884. It was converted for pedestrian use in 2008. Now, one of the other things that took place in the interim was the replacement of the bridge's movable span. This navigation span in the middle, which was permanently raised when the bridge went out of service, it wasn't always a vertical lift bridge. It was originally a swing span, so the center span would pivot in the middle to allow boats to travel on one side or the other of the moved span. So that swing span was replaced in 1970 with the modern vertical lift span that you see today. The bridge actually went out of service shortly thereafter. But again, it was converted for pedestrian use in 2008. Now, in order to make this bridge ADA compliant for pedestrians, they incorporated elevators into the two towers. So you would go out on the one approach, you would go up, straight up basically, to access the raised center span of the bridge, and then you would take another elevator to go back down on the other side. It's actually kind of cool how they made that work.
Yeah.
It's a very lovely bridge. It's still, as you see, it's been modernized over the years and all that, but it's still, in considering it was out of use for a number of years and it's only been open as a pedestrian facility, it's in pretty good shape, I would say.
Yeah.
So it's a nice piece to have right in town.
Yeah.
I mentioned the I-30 bridge on the Arkansas River when we were talking about the 30 crossing project. Again, that project is underway. It began in 2020 and is expected to be completed in 2024, but I'll show you some of my pictures from 2021 as the project was really getting underway. So I guess I could say I got all the pictures I could possibly want of the old bridge, and maybe I'll have to make a return in a couple of years when the whole project is wrapped up. But this picture here on this slide, the full slide picture, shows you the status of the completion as of February 2023. So that's kind of what we're looking at as of right now. Again, it's not that different looking a bridge than its predecessor, right? It's the old bridge was pretty basic looking, and the new one is pretty basic too. Here's an idea. You know what? If you're going to spend $600 million on this project, how about making the new bridge look nice?
I agree.
That I could get behind, actually. You know, I know that they put a lot of effort into the new Broadway bridge and all that, but you know, I would give up a lane in each direction on I-30 for a bridge that actually looks really nice. I don't think that's too much to ask. And, you know, cities around the country have really gotten the craze of the signature span. And, you know, I don't see why we couldn't do something similar to that here.
I agree. The reality is that having a signature span just brings, you know, a lot of, you know, I just think it's great for communities and for cities. They're not just pretty to look at, but they provide a sense of identity. They bring tourism, right? Because even though you and I and the people in our chat are all bridge geeks, you know, that even just regular people like looking at pretty bridges too.
Yeah, and when they are done right, a signature bridge, whether it's an arch or a cable stay bridge, it adds to the city's skyline.
Yes.
And it's something for the community to identify with. And I think that people kind of look at you funny when you say it attracts tourists, but that is the case. When you add something that striking to a city's skyline, it makes your city all the more attractive.
It does.
So that does have a trickle-down effect somewhere along the line when it comes to people visiting from out of town.
Yeah. And you definitely want people to, it also helps kind of lure people in, if that makes sense. Like, even people that commute. Like, this is the thing that's so interesting to me, right? Like, I never got tired. Like, when I lived in Baltimore City and I commuted to Rockville for a job, I never got tired of seeing the skyline. Like, to me, that screamed, like, I'm home when I saw the skyline. And, you know, it got to, you know, it makes a big impression even for people who live in a place to have a bridge that, gives them the feeling of home.
Yeah, and I guess the Broadway Bridge services that purpose fine. Like, okay, but again, in the case of 30 Crossing, there's no better opportunity to really make a statement than with something on the interstate system.
Yeah,
So I just think it's a missed opportunity in that
I
respect.
agree.
Um, you know,
Yep, I agree.
Little Rock did not miss opportunities to refurbish old railroad bridges, though, I have to tell you.
Yes.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
we talked about the Junction Bridge a moment ago, and I will conclude our discussion with the Rock Island Bridge, or that was the name of it originally. It was built in 1899 for the Choctaw and Memphis Railroad. This was another bridge that had a center span that was a swing bridge. And the swing span was replaced with a vertical lift span in the 1960s. The bridge was subsequently abandoned around 1983, and it kind of sat in a perpetual state of we don't know what to do with this thing. But as part of the Clinton Presidential Center construction, this bridge was brought back to life as a pedestrian bridge. And it was rehabbed and reopened to pedestrians in 2011. So you can
I
go
love
and
it.
check that out today. Yeah, that is one thing I will give Little Rock an A+ grade on is they managed to find creative ways to keep their old railroad bridges in service,
Yes.
in useful functions. So I think that's pretty cool. And if you're in Little Rock and you like bridges, I would definitely suggest that you check out both the Clinton Bridge and the Junction Bridge. Well, that is all I got, folks. Or as they say in Looney Tunes, that's all, folks. So thank you for watching this high quality presentation. Okay, so there's no show next week. Okay, so I gotta make that clear to everybody. I did not forget about next week. There just is no show next week. So we're gonna have a combined week off, my friends and I, and we will reconvene on the 27th. So 2 Saturdays from now. And our first episode back from our mini vacation will be an overview of the state of Alaska. So we're gonna kind
That
of.
is going to be a good episode.
You know what? Just waiting. You know who's gonna be on that show?
Who?
Well, I ain't gonna spoil it for the listening audience, but if you know who's gonna be on it, yeah, that you would say it was gonna be a kick-ass show just because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about Alaska. We're gonna go from the American Deep South up to the Arctic
The last
Circle.
frontier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're just like it's nothing, All right. So let's what do I got here for you guys video wise? So I think I'll just pick something and I'll start rolling with it here. I'll show you. I'll put I-430 up on the screen here. I think that the vast majority of the videos in Little Rock, as I said, they were filmed in 2021. I think most of it was uploaded to YouTube shortly thereafter. There is some stuff from 2023 that recently got added. In fact, I think that all of the interstate or all of the video inventory that I have from the state of Arkansas is now officially on YouTube at this point, and that includes I-30 and I-40 and also I-49 in northwest Arkansas. But initially when I did all the uploading, I did the auxiliary interstates first, just because those tend to fall in more urban areas anyway, and people want to see those more than the others.
Yeah.
So that's what I fast-tracked, and then I kind of filled in the gaps from there. So we're watching a full-length drive of I-430, which was filmed in February 2023. Laura, I'm in need of a little bit of a voice break here. Would you like to revisit what we were talking about earlier as far as like your role and your scope of work as an adjunct professor?
Absolutely. Yay! I'm so glad you asked.
Go for it.
Yay! So as I mentioned, last semester, I was kind of asked at the last minute if I wanted to teach a course on a graduate course on sustainable urban communities, and I did, and got thrown straight into the deep end. But it was a very rewarding experience for me. So when I got asked if I wanted to teach that plus 3 other accelerated mini courses, I said, yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you a little bit about what I'm doing. So I am my official title is visiting instructor in the graduate program in landscape architecture. Yes, which is interesting, right? But there's a lot of interdisciplinary crossover at Morgan State University with a lot of the programs in the School of Architecture and Planning, particularly between the City and Regional Planning program, the Landscape Architecture program, and the Architecture program. So I am technically teaching urban planning courses but I'm in the Landscape Architecture department. But basically, the program that I'm teaching in is the Certificate in Sustainable Urban Communities program. So basically, that program is a post-baccalaureate certificate program. So basically, if you already have a bachelor's degree and you don't want to get a whole nother degree, but you want to take, some courses and do a certificate program in sustainable urban communities, this is the program for you. But basically, apply now. I could be your professor. The best part is that the courses that I teach, and I think all the courses in the Sustainable Urban Communities program, are all online and asynchronous. So you don't have to get online at Zoom at a particular time. Everything is on a platform called Canvas. And I am incredibly thankful for the previous program director, former Morgan assistant professor Jack Leonard, because he was the one that really created, these courses. And, as I continue to teach them, I might change, some things in them. But he's the one that put this program together and created the courses. So I'm just kind of plugging in from there, what he's already created. So the courses themselves, the one I taught last semester and this semester is the Intro to Sustainable Urban Communities course, which is the 501 course. And, so basically, introduction to sustainability in environmental, social, economic contexts. And, in addition to, doing readings and having essays, sort of the big project that you get to do is you get to pick a community and you get to intensely study it. As well as, so you study kind of everything about it, like its history, its demographics, its, all sorts of, different things, even the transportation in the community. And basically you put together this video presentation and, you kind of go over, you outline the community and then you address the things that could be improved to improve sustainability in the community. And last semester, I had, I think, 13 students, and it was just really cool, the projects that they did. The majority picked neighborhoods in Baltimore, which makes sense, especially since a lot of the students, even though my course is online and asynchronous, they're taking a lot of them are taking it as an elective. So I had graduate level students as well as doctoral level students. So basically took the course as an elective. Some took it as an elective, some took it as the first step in this certificate program. But anyway, it was really cool because they picked different neighborhoods. And so some of them actually, some of my students also attended class in person. So they are in Baltimore. Some were Baltimore natives, some moved to Baltimore. I had international students as well. But also I had students from, other parts of the country and other parts of the world taking my course, which is really cool. So I got to learn about a lot of different communities. And so it was rewarding for me as well, because I felt like I got to learn too, about, different neighborhoods and different communities. And part of the course is learning that a community can be defined so many different ways. Like one of my students, for instance, her focus was very much on her local like YMCA, and the neighborhood that was in, and then the communities that draw into that, and the activities that are connected through that. And then of course you have a lot more like traditional, like, oh, I'm gonna, students that did like the Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore or downtown Baltimore in a harbor. And, so it was a really cool experience, and I'm excited to teach that again. The other courses that I'm teaching, so that course, the CSUS, CSUC 501 course, that's actually a half semester course. So it's pretty intense. It's, a lot of material packed into 8 weeks. The other courses that I'm teaching, this is the first time I'm teaching these. These are each 1 credit courses that are 4 weeks long. The first one I'm teaching is called the Urban Village, 503, the Urban Village Sustainable Neighborhoods. Also teaching 504, Sustainable Urban Site Design, and 505, the Natural Built Environment. So, pretty exciting, but also, definitely have to keep up with these courses as a student as well as the professor, because they're pretty accelerated, so that students can take and do the certificate program in an accelerated time. The program itself, the certificate program, is a 15 credit program. So you have 6 credits in core courses, of which the 501 is a core course. And then there's 3 different concentrations. And then, you have 6 credits, that's 2 within one of those areas of concentrations. And some of the courses are 1 credit, some of them are 3 credit. And then you also have 3 credits of electives. So everything that I'm teaching, for the most part, again, so the concentrations, you have planning and policy. And so all of my courses are in that option. There's also the sustainable design and construction concentration, as well as the sustainable urban environment. So lots of options. So like I said, the one is a lot more planning and policy based. So if you're looking for a good urban planning certificate, that would be the concentration for you. And then the other ones, sustainable design and construction, definitely a lot more landscape architecture based, as well as the sustainable urban environment. Has a lot more landscape architecture in that one as well. But so that's sort of the breakdown of what I'm teaching and the program. And I'm going to throw some links in the chat as well, in case anybody wants to, look into it any further. Including, I'll give you all the link to I have my own faculty profile page.
Oh, awesome.
I know.
Look at you moving up in the world. I like it.
Moving on up. So I just posted that, my faculty page in the chat, which if you notice, I reference on there that I also record webinars and virtual tours on the Roadway Whiz YouTube channel, with an emphasis on social and racial justice issues and history related to interstate and U.S. highways.
Which YouTube channel did you say that is?
Yours! The Roadway Whiz channel.
Oh, Roadway? Yeah, I don't know who that is. So. I did look at that page, yeah, and it was very kind of you to mention that. See, I'm kind of the minor league. I'm the feeder system. Like you got promoted to the big leagues now. So, no, it's great that you're getting that opportunity.
It really is. It's really cool. I absolutely love it, and I'm really thankful that I threw my hat into the adjunct pool and said, hey, if anything comes up you think would be a good fit, I'm open to it. And these courses came up, and so it's been really, it's been, like I said, it's been such a privilege, and it's been a really awesome experience so far.
Oh yeah, if you get the opportunity to do something like that, definitely take it. You
Yeah.
know. So I'm glad that I'm glad that people at Morgan thought highly enough of you to think you were good enough to do it, and I think you will do very well. So,
Thank you.
congratulations to you, and in the words of Sheev Palpatine, I will watch your career with great interest. I quote too much from Star Wars, in case you didn't know already.
No, I didn't know. Imagine
Yeah,
that.
it's one of my things that I always fall back on. I know those movies way too well.
They are good movies.
You know what? Well, especially if you've seen the nonsense that Disney's put out in the last 10 years. But that's another discussion for another day.
Yes, it is. Oh my gosh.
We are now watching I-30. This is another February of 2023 video. I wanted to show you kind of where things were at in the construction of 30 Crossing the last time I was in town, less than a year ago. I forgot to mention that history of road meets. There was a meet here in Little Rock last year. I think it was in June of 23, and one of the signature pieces of that meet was to check out the progress on 30 Crossing.
Yeah.
And I was going to put a slide in the PowerPoint with the meet photo for that, and I just forgot to do it. So that's my mistake. But just know that meet existed, and it was a splendid time was guaranteed for all, as they said in the Beatles once a few years ago. I want to tackle some live chat comments here before I move on to my next topic of discussion here. So if anybody's got any questions they would like to ask either yours truly or Laura, we are at your service for the next, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. The one that I saw, where was the one that I saw that I wanted to answer here? Okay, so here's one that I think you and I both can sort of tackle, Laura. This is coming from Redneck Lover 22.
Okay. Yeah.
By the way, he says he was having dinner at Bob Evans, which I am all in favor of that move. That is a power move right there. Bob Evans is one of my dietary weak points. I know it's like, you know what, you pass the sign on the highway and your head immediately goes to biscuits and gravy and you're like, ah, shit. You're not supposed to have it, but man, it's really good, man.
We have a Bob Evans in Bel Air South. I don't know why we haven't gone there yet.
Oh, that's right, you do, right on 24 there.
Yes, that's right.
Oh man, I know. Well, we might have to change that.
We will.
In the not too distant future.
Our 2024 resolution is to visit together the Bob Evans in Bel Air.
See, this is where we're at with New Year's resolutions. Yep. So, all right, with the question that he asked that I think we should tackle is, my question to Laura is, why do you believe limiting a bridge, and he's referring to the 30 Crossing project here, I think. Why do you believe that limiting a bridge is going to somehow limit people moving to the suburbs? I think you could go in a number of different directions here as far as an answer is concerned, but they all sort of feed back to the same thing, which is induced demand. in general, when you are, and Laura, you can chime in on this whenever you're ready.
Yes.
And then this is especially the case in urban areas. When you make something easier, it just encourages people to want to use it more. And this is not just a transportation thing. This is just like a societal human nature thing. But just in the transportation realm of things, if, let's say, you take a certain route to work, and it takes you an hour, and you have other alternatives that are comparable in the amount of time that it would take for you to get from point A to point B. But then the DOT comes around and says, well, we're going to add 2 lanes of freeway in each direction and cut your travel time down to 35 minutes. Well, it's just going to make not only you more likely to keep doing what you're doing, but it's also going to encourage more people to do what you're doing as well, because now it all of a sudden got a lot easier. All of a sudden, the time was reduced significantly more to make that trip into town. And it makes, by association, it makes it a lot more feasible to live out in a distance that's significantly further away from the center of a city than it would have otherwise.
Right.
If we apply this to the Little Rock case, because you have to take these things on a city-by-city basis. However, there are certain metrics you can look at that are more common from city to city, but let's just take this from this individual example. It is going to be a lot easier for people to live outside of the city, particularly in the north, where the white flight in the 1950s and 60s took place in the city. Post-construction of this project, and that is because you are adding a lot more lane miles to this freeway, which allows a lot more vehicles per hour to utilize the highway, which is going to reduce the travel time to get to these northeastern suburbs, which is going to in turn make them a lot more viable. That is the fundamental concept of what is called an induced demand. And there's been debate on message boards and forums for years about whether it exists or not. Make no mistake, it absolutely exists. Why does it exist? Because we are humans, and we look for the easy way out of situations all the time. And so the easy solution might be, well, let's just add a bunch more lane miles and call it a day. Well, the downstream consequences of that are that you're going to now make it a lot easier to sprawl into the suburbs, where transportation in general is pretty inefficient to begin with. It's not transit friendly. And ultimately that has impacts down the line, quality of life wise, and et cetera, et cetera. But Laura, where do you want to go with that?
I want to address Redneck Lover 22's follow-up question, which is what the direction I was going to go in anyway. But isn't overbuilding better than underbuilding and regretting it later? So we've been talking about me being, an adjunct professor. I still work my day job as a planner of a small town, and the northeast of Baltimore. And right now, so again, we talked about how you have to look at these things on a city-by-city basis, but also that there are general trends. It is no accident that, so in the case of the Baltimore area, that about a decade ago, the Hogan administration, I lost my train of thought. Actually, this predates Hogan. My apologies. So about a decade ago, you had the initial expansion of the express toll lanes on I-95, northeast of Baltimore, right? And so those ended just north of the White Marsh exit. Then when Governor Hogan got into office, he canceled funding for the Red Line light rail in Baltimore City, and then also greenlighted funding to extend these express toll lanes. and these decisions were two separate decisions, but they were not in a vacuum because, that particular governor is a developer and is friendly with developers. And what happened with the initial phase of the express toll lane expansion, and I know this because I commuted it, is that when those toll lanes first opened, the commute got 15 minutes faster. A commute that was an hour long suddenly became 45 minutes, going from Harford County, Maryland to Baltimore City. And it was like, this is amazing. Whoa. What that does is that then becomes a lure to attract more suburban development because, like, look how much faster the commute is now. And so it's encouraged a big wave of development in Harford County. The problem is that you have a big backlash. And, so you've overbuilt the highway on purpose because you wanted to encourage more development close to 95 on that corridor. On the flip side, this upset, the people. Of course, we could talk about NIMBYism all day, but and the not in my backyard, yes, that exists everywhere. But what basically happened is you took an area that was a decade ago farmland and now is mixed-use development. We're not talking about infill development. We're talking about completely new development. And so you've had this backlash, and you had a new form of government on the county level, as well as on the town level, that are completely anti-development. So overbuilding and encouraging sprawl is bad from an infrastructure standpoint of people moving further out, and also, taking away land that is used for, agricultural and green, green that is used as de facto green space, like woods and things, and is now being developed. So when you overbuild, and this is not the case everywhere, because West Virginia, has tried this, and people aren't exactly clamoring to, move to West Virginia. But in areas that are heavily developed, outside major, urban areas, that, yes, induced demand does encourage more people to sprawl out, and for the people that already live there to be upset with the sprawl and to try and do everything they can to stop it. So it's a lose-lose situation for both the city as well as the more rural suburbs. The city doesn't want to lose people to the sprawl, and the people in the suburbs don't want the new people to come in. So looking at this from a sustainable urban community level, it's a disaster. But it's also, it puts something in more rural and suburban communities that they don't want either, because yes, naturally growth is going to happen. Places like Manhattan, had single family houses on them in the 19th century, and obviously now has skyscrapers. You can't stop growth, but at the same time, you can stop things that will heavily accelerate or exponentially accelerate growth from being something that naturally happens to being something that heavily encourages it.
Yeah, and I don't buy that the attitude of let's put a freeway in because we can is a sustainable move to make nowadays.
Right. Because then it gets into...
I mean, it never really made sense in the first place, but especially nowadays, communities care more about sustainability, smart growth, all that stuff. There are people who will roll their eyes at me when I say that, but I would remind those folks that all politics is local, and this is the direction that things are moving in anyway. This isn't something that is going to take place on a large-scale federal level. Communities and states are moving in that direction in general. And so that's kind of the attitude of things nowadays. And, we really should be looking at ways to integrate our population centers rather than further encouraging more flight from them. That's kind of, my aunt lives in the middle of a city. And so I'm kind of used to hanging out in an urban setting. I'm no stranger to that kind of thing. Um, we should be encouraging our neighborhoods to be strengthened rather than weakened by further encouraging sprawl out of those areas.
Yeah,
That's the personal argument from me.
Yeah, if any of you have heard of strong towns, Chuck Marone, he puts out a very good argument from like the economic and infrastructure level that as we talked about earlier with 30 crossing, that that yes, at some point stuff's got to come up for maintenance, but do you want to build new stuff on top of that maintenance?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to mention that and then I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful to build all this beautiful new infrastructure, but just wait until 30 years from now when the bill comes for its revamping and maintenance.
Yeah.
So when we talk about sustainable growth, we're not just talking about in year 0. We're talking about in year 30 and year 60. These things, once we build them, they are forever our problem from there on out. And we have a terrible reputation in the United States as it is with maintenance and upkeep of our infrastructure. What in God's name makes you think that we're magically going to get better by building more stuff? And not only that, but remember that the baby boomer generation is retiring. And so we're losing the workforce that we had that built that system in year 0, which was 60 years ago. We don't have the money to keep it going. We don't have the workforce to keep it going, but we're supposed to just keep building new stuff willy-nilly as if there's no consequence down the road. Well, that's not how it works. And at some point, there's going to be a reckoning, and we're going to get the bill, and we're going to be like, you want us to do what now? And we're not going to be able to pay for it, and we're not going to be able to actually physically do the work.
Yeah.
I run into this problem all the time as a professional. I don't talk about this very much, because when I post on my Facebook page, you guys only want to see me talk about roads and post pictures and drone stuff and all that. You don't want to see me talk about this stuff, so I don't. But I will in this case. One of the reasons why my current project that I am assigned to is... So we started in August, and it was supposed to be a 12-month project, and we're already 3 months behind schedule.
Ooh.
You know why the reason for that is?
Why?
We can't find labor.
Oh.
We cannot find crews. It's not to do with the engineering of it. It's not to do with the client meddling in our project. The client has been great from day one. It's not to do with the inspection staff holding up certifications for stuff. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with the workforce. The interstate highway system that was built in the 1960s, a 42,000-mile system in total, was largely built in the 1960s and 70s. And it was built by the same generation of workers who are now leaving the field. And by the way, it was built all at the same time. And you know what that means? It's all reaching the end of its useful life at about the same time.
Yep.
So what we are going to inevitably have to do is basically rebuild the interstate system mile for mile from scratch if we are going to keep the same level of service in place. That is going to be difficult enough as it is without these anti-sprawl measures in place. I think it's the responsible thing to do to put a cap on sprawl and these things that encourage it. Because I'm looking at the bill that's coming in the mail 10, 20 years from now, and I'm saying that we can't afford that as a country. Can't afford it
Yeah.
as it is. So how the hell do you expect me to we brought this up earlier, but this I-69 example, how the hell do you expect that to survive beyond 30 years if we build it today?
Yeah.
Like, where the hell are you going to get the money to maintain that? You can't get the money to maintain I-40. You can't keep that I-40 bridge open without cracks in it. And that bridge isn't even that old. It's only 50 years old, right?
Yeah.
So you can't even keep the infrastructure you have in good shape. So what in the world makes you think that you're going to be able to keep the other stuff that you want to build today? You know, where are we going to be in 30 years with this 30 crossing project? What's that going to look like?
Yeah. It's so interesting because I work, I work mostly government jobs, right? I work for a local government now. I've worked for state and city governments, and it's something that I think, I think we talk about it, and it's come up, but I think that it hasn't been emphasized enough is how that whenever there's a big event, whether that big event is something that is like a change in any kind of system, right? How there's a wave of retirements. I cannot emphasize enough how the pandemic caused a wave of retirements, as well as a wave of deaths. But that, there's a misconception like, oh, nobody wants to work anymore. That's why you can't get the labor. And it's like, no, actually, how many boomers retired during the pandemic? Boomers that would have, maybe gradually eased their way out. But the pandemic became a time where they were like, nope, I'm 66 is good enough. I'm out.
Yeah. It's a combination of different things, right? So it's not just the fact that all the boomers are retiring, and it's not just the fact that the younger generation just isn't replacing them for whatever reason in the skilled labor workforce. There are reasons for that. There are a lot of reasons for that we could spend time on talking about, but I'd rather not do that tonight. So it's a combination of both of those. Nobody wants to work, but also you're having a massive population loss from the workforce at the same time. So it's kind of adding up to this huge labor shortage that is not really being reported that much in major news outlets, I would say, but it'll start to be reported on in the years ahead. That's for sure. When certain things start to happen.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I guess that's kind of like my experience as an engineer. That's kind of the answer that I would give you. That's my long answer. It's that we should not be encouraging the overdevelopment of our infrastructure systems because we just can't maintain them.
Yeah.
And politics has a way of meddling with a lot of stuff too. If Arkansas politicians weren't, so heavily influential at the federal level, would the 30 Crossing project look the way that it does today? Probably not. That's another part of this that doesn't really get talked about. We mentioned it earlier with the whole I-630 thing. Like, that would never have been an interstate highway without a congressman from Arkansas who decided, you know what, I would like that to be an interstate.
Yeah.
So the government has a way of meddling in things that they really shouldn't be meddling in also. So there's no one answer to this. There's a whole bunch of problems going on. Yeah. So
I want to just throw out just a couple more things. I see Killer's Opinions follow-up question. Why can't Gen Z replace the retiring boomers? There's so many reasons, right? There's that population-wise just isn't there.
Well, first of all, there aren't enough of them.
Right. And also, something else that I think is, as somebody with chronic health issues myself, I don't think it's talked about enough is the rise of chronic health issues. As well as the rise of using drugs like marijuana to, it's interesting because that's a thing that nobody wants to talk about. And I don't know if this is something that's come up in your line of work, Dan, but it's something. So Maryland legalized recreational marijuana last year, and that puts a strain on, so on a local government level, if the local government takes federal dollars, it doesn't matter if it's legal in the state because it's
Right.
not legal
Yeah.
federally. So you can't get the people to work in the public works department if they smoke weed, which is legal in the state but not legal federally, and they're subject to drug tests.
Yep.
So there's so many, these things that like there's just all these reasons that could add up together. I feel like you could spend a video on each reason.
Yeah, you know what? I said we weren't doing a show next week, but maybe we are now. I don't know.
Right? But it's hard to say, but it's shocking to me. The last comment on chronic health issues. It's shocking to me as somebody who's 36 how unalone I am in dealing with chronic health issues in my mid-30s. That's very scary to me. Like, oh crap, my rare condition is becoming a lot less rare. That's not good. Like, if more and more people are having these issues, part of it is awareness, but also part of it is, oh crap, they're having these issues. Like, and that's a whole other thing, right? Is it that nobody wants to work, or is it that they physically can't do physical work?
Yeah.
So
it's there are many facets to this whole thing, and
oh yeah.
and I think that we've only scratched the surface on on the deeper dive and the deeper discussions we could have on this stuff.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think it's good that we've kind of gone there tonight. Because these are the conversations that, I say this every once in a while, every time that we have a meaningful discussion on this channel. I always seem to say this, but these are the kinds of discussions that we don't have often enough.
Yeah.
In respect to road enthusiasm and all that. So it's good that we're kind of, this is a subject that we're not, afraid to tackle. So those are my thoughts. I wanted to get that out there.
Same. Those are my thoughts, and you're right. I love that you and I get to have these conversations that are these complex issues.
Yeah, I mean, complex issues that don't have easy fixes, right?
Unfortunately, they do not have easy fixes.
Now we have a couple more videos I want to play before we sign off. Before we do that, I would like to tell you about the Gribble Nation blog series that I've started on. I said that I would save that for later, so I'm going to save that for the end. As a contributing member of the GribbleNation.org team, which I became a member of in 2021, I've been looking for ways to bring my photography and opinions and views and travel history to their blog site in a way that really expands on what they've already done. Adam Prince and Doug Kerr have been at it, for over 20 years on that site, chronicling sites all across North America. So one of the projects I've embarked on here in early 2024 is a new blog series on the bridges of the lower Mississippi River. So this is a series that I began writing about a week ago. I estimated that if you take the number of bridges, ferries, and flood control structures on the lower river, downriver from Cairo, Illinois, there are about 26 different landmarks that I would need to write entries for the blog. This past week, including the ones that I wrote this afternoon, I've written the first 17 of them. So this is a project that has largely been written, but will gradually be published to the blog in the months of January through April. And the culmination of this is going to be what I hope will be the creation of a Mississippi Delta regional page on the blog that will capture all of the lower Mississippi River landmarks and all of the river towns and all of the landmarks in the cities along the river that we choose to document. The Mississippi Delta is a part of the country that has largely been undocumented by the blog over the years. And this is going to be the first major appraisal of all the significant structures on the lower Mississippi River for this site. So it's a project that has kind of been marinating in my mind for the last 2 to 3 years, but it only really started to become a serious possibility in the aftermath of my cross-country travels last winter, where I spent some time I spent a couple of days just going up and down the river documenting the bridges. Which was one of the coolest things that I did that whole winter. I don't know if I told you that, Laura, but one of the things that I am most fond of is the fact that I added all the documentation of those bridges to my library.
Awesome.
And so now all that stuff is going to get transferred into blog form. So the first article in the series was published last week. There will be 2 articles published every week from now through probably the middle of April. So it'll be a slow to release kind of a thing, but you'll gradually kind of get to know every bridge on the river over the winter. So if you're looking for winter reading and all that nonsense, and if you're looking for pictures of everything from yours truly, then you'll get to see that as well. So it's a project that I'm really excited about. I think it adds a lot of new interesting stuff in a new part of the country to the Gribble Nation site. And I'm looking forward to seeing it come to life and seeing what you guys have to say about it.
Awesome.
Well, that's my 2 cents on that. And we've come to the end of tonight's episode. I don't know if we had any last minute questions here, but Laura, did you want to throw anything else out there before we sign off?
No, I think I've said everything to be said. Thank you so much, as always, for inviting me to be on here, and thank you to everybody chiming in the chat. It's like I said, it's always just like a great privilege to be able to come on these webinars and have these conversations with you.
Well, you are one of my favorite panelists to have on because you're very knowledgeable on the urban planning side of things, and we always, it's funny. We always seem to have deep conversations whenever you come on. I don't know why that is. But, no, we're always in tip-top form whenever you're on, so it's always great to have you, and it's great that you were able to come on tonight. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah, so the show on the 27th, we're back with our appraisal of the state of Alaska. Yes, I hope to see you guys in New Orleans at the Road Meet February 17th and 18th as well. Don't forget about that. I will be there, and there's no reason why you guys shouldn't be there either, because it's going to be friggin' awesome. So that's the end of that discussion, right? There's no debate.
That's right.
So I think we're going to leave it here. I don't see any more comments here that I think need answering at this point. I think we've addressed everything that needs to be addressed.
Pretty much. Yeah, I just want to throw out there. It was Mark mentioned something about visiting Roanoke, Virginia. That's an area that's very near and dear to my heart. So cool that you're potentially going there next weekend, and maybe I'll make it to NOLA next month. You never know. That would be awesome to be able to see you there.
Yes, Laura will surprise us. Like, hello, I'm here.
Yep, never say never.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, so that's what's coming up on the horizon here on the channel and in the Road Meets realm. So definitely looking forward to that. Definitely check out the gribblnation.org blog to track the progress of the Mississippi Delta series. That's well underway at this point. And as far as stuff on the Roadway Whiz channel, that's about all I got for you tonight. So I'm going to sign off on behalf of Laura and the cast of thousands here at Roadway Whiz. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. I hope you found this episode and the adjoining discussions useful. And I look forward to seeing you on our next live episode. So until then, happy travels. And take care.
Happy travels.
Happy travels. And we will see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, everyone.